I wasn't there when it happened, but I knew the cave, the place in the cave where the events took place, the people involved, and it was very, very disturbing. It was a totally unpredictable accident. In this particular cave, there was a large, sort of flat stone, undoubtedly weighing many tons, which stood vertically in the passage very close to the entrance. You could go around either side of it. Most people went on the left low side because you just kind of walked through sideways. A few brave souls went to the right higher side though, just to avoid the quote traffic jam. Going to the right meant that you had to climb up just a little bit. To pass the stone, people pushed on the top of the stone to the left and the cave wall on the right to sort of swing by it. The move was easy and not really a big deal. Prior to the caving trip in question, the one I didn't go on, there had been a huge rainfall in the area. Like most limestone caves, this cave was a drainage passage. You did not go into this cave if it was going to rain. But on that day, no rain was forecasted, so my friends went in anyway. One of my best caving buddies chose to go high and to the right of the stone, and like a zillion people before him, he pushed on the top of the stone and the wall to swing by the stone. It turned out though, that the rainwater from the big storm had removed some of the mud around the base of the stone, and the stone was now unstable. When my friend pushed on the stone to swing by it, the stone broke loose, and its many tons just tipped a few feet until it hit the wall on the left. I'll spare you the details of what happened to my friend, who just happened to be between the stone and the wall on the left. His name was Eric. He was a young adult, a good kid whom we all liked, and we all went to his funeral. It was terrible. Sometimes you can just be in the wrong place at the wrong time, where there's nothing but luck between you and death, and if luck's not with you, then you die. I work as a childcare professional, and one of the kids that I look after had recently gotten into hiking. I decided to take him to a really cool trail in Salt Fork State Park. We were all set to hike to Hosok's Cave after parking right near the beginning of the trailhead. The entire trail is only about half of a mile, which is why I chose this trail for our hike that day. I also chose this trail because any time that I had been on it before, it was very busy and full of people, and a very popular spot which made me feel secure. However, this past summer we had a cluster of severe summer storms which caused massive damage to the trail, so to my surprise it was much more difficult and completely empty. I wasn't really bothered by the trail being obviously empty, because there was a small construction crew working on a bridge that was just barely visible from the trailhead. He was still up for the hike, despite the entire width of the trail being washed out, until it was no more than a foot wide with a 6 to 12 foot drop off into a creek bed that is solid rock and several trees down. He was very athletic, and I was confident in his abilities if he was, and he was so excited to tackle our adventure. We made it all the way to the platform that allows you to see the entire cave. There were many downed trees surrounding the platform, and it was actually closed at this point, but we had made it this far already, so we decided to maneuver around the platform and proceed the few hundred feet into the cave. We spent the most time in this area due to the difficulty, so I know exactly what it looked like. There were tree roots directly under the platform, and you could climb down either side of them. It's also worth noting that Hosok's Cave is much more like a cliff with an overhanging rock formation and a trickle of a waterfall directly in the middle. It's not really a creepy closed-up cave. It's very open and beautiful. We got to the cave and I noticed a candle. It wasn't burning recently, but had been at some point and was sitting on a large rock that had a heart carved into it. I chalked it up to someone having a date or something and disregarded it. He wanted to climb to the top, where I noticed 2 more candles and 3 stacks of small rocks that had been stacked up by somebody. I definitely felt weird at this point, but it was about that time that he found a small puddle full of baby salamanders and wanted to catch them. It was the happiest that I had seen him in a very long time, and I didn't have the heart to tell him that it was time to go. We spent about an hour catching baby salamanders, and I watched him have the time of his life. We finally decided to leave, and when we got to the platform, dead center in the middle of the tree roots was a wet washcloth hanging that was absolutely not there before. He noticed it as well, but did not pick up on the severity of the situation that we were in. At that moment, I factually knew 2 things. 1, someone was watching us, and we didn't see them. And 2, they were now potentially hiding in the woods, and made it a point to not be seen, but to leave an object to be noticed. There was no running back with the narrow trail, and I was not about to tell him that we were in potential danger. I told him to go in front of me, and I just kept encouraging him that he was doing great over and over, and that seemed to speed him up naturally. I never saw anyone while we were on the trail. We got to the car and I locked the doors immediately. On our way out of the park, a very dirty man, probably in his 30s, came out of the woods and made it a point to stare at me with the most empty of expressions that I had ever seen. The man followed me with his eyes and head as I drove by him, and continued to stare at me until I couldn't see him anymore. I knew the third fact at that point. He had made it a point to make himself apparent to me, and that facts 1 and 2 were true. That stare stuck with me for days, and I considered counseling after this as it bothered me for several weeks, causing me severe anxiety. I tried to tell myself that maybe we just interrupted his bath time and he was camping and didn't want to startle us. After all, the crazy-looking man had ample time to do anything that he wanted while we were catching salamanders. I just cannot in any way rationalize why he stared into my eyes the way he did if he wanted to go unnoticed. Deep down, I know that it is much more likely that this was a deliberate action intended to scare me. The kid that I was watching never had any idea how panicked I was, and to this day, it was the most fun that I had ever seen him have. He brings it up regularly, and it was a very positive experience for him. It was one of the worst experiences ever for me. It had made me feel so sick and disturbed. We took a trip to Iceland. Me, my girlfriend, my 2 friends, and their significant others. We had it on our itinerary to stop and check out a lava tube, an underground tunnel that lava used to flow through. This tunnel was completely underground after the first 200 meters or so. It twisted and turned, so we lost all sight of the daylight from the entrance. Pitch black. Total darkness. We start our little hike. The tube is only 2 kilometers from the very start to the dead end. It was July, but there was still snow in some of the tunnel that was open to the outside. Very cool. We came across a few couples who told us that the rocks get treacherous and they didn't have flashlights. We had a few ourselves and we were all fairly athletic. We figured, sure, why not? After about an hour of going up and down the large boulders and volcanic rock, we get to the large, quote, hill in the tunnel. At the top of this hill is a huge boulder just sitting very precariously at the very tip. The boulder was tapered off a bit to the back side, so it wasn't so bad trying to get up. But the front side, we saw at first, was flat. Not smooth, but just a straight, flat part of rock. I climbed up it because I thought it would be a great spot for a Superman pose and a picture, and a good storytelling piece, too. As I climb up, I get into position, and my buddy snaps the picture. After he takes the picture, with flash obviously, one of the girls noticed something rather odd to my left. Everyone shines their flashlight on the area, and about 6 feet to my left, suspended 10 to 12 feet above the bottom of the cave, was a rope, anchored to the ceiling. It came down out of the anchor to a knot about 4 feet from the ceiling. The knot turned into a loop, and the loop had been cut at the bottom. It looked a lot like a noose. Yellow nylon rope, suspended 1.75 kilometers into a lava tube, 20-ish feet above the floor of the cave. The strangest part was that there was no easy way to get to the roof to anchor it. It was a very well done anchor, and had been there a while. It looked like someone was determined to come out and spend their final hours in absolute darkness. We kept going, but noped about it the whole time. I go caving with my dad, who grew up mining uranium until his family's mine went belly up. He's pretty used to enclosed spaces and being underground, and I was raised similarly, albeit without the radon gas. I've rappelled into pits I can't see the bottom of, bouldered my way along and over one of the largest underwater rivers in North America, and nearly caught in a flash flood. But this time I slipped into a crevice whose bottom is, as of today, not mapped and has never been reached or documented by anyone. It was by far the scariest damn thing to ever happen to me. I had to brace myself with my feet, back against one wall and legs stretched out in front of me, arms on either side. I was in a pretty good spot to be, roughly 10 feet down, on wet, smooth rock, and my headlamp had come unplugged from its battery in my pack, meaning I only had the light from my dad looking down on me 10 feet up to see by. He had to leave to go get rope, and I couldn't really go anywhere or reattach my lamp in my position, so I got to chill in that crevice for roughly an hour, but God, it felt like so much longer. I thought the fall itself was scary, but it was nothing compared to that. Complete darkness, and it was so fucking quiet. I could hear my blood rushing in my ears, I could hear my knees cracking under the pressure, every piece of gravel that came loose from the tread of my boots hitting the sides of the crevice on the way down, just fading out. I started seeing lights and little flashes, and I couldn't tell if my eyes were open or closed, and I couldn't even move to check, or I'd fall God knows how far. I could hear more than I ever wanted, while simultaneously experiencing the most quiet I had ever felt. And all I could feel was the rock against my back and hands, and presumably what my feet were braced against. I started not to be able to tell up from down, started hearing footsteps and seeing movement and shapes from the corners of my eyes. It was utter hell waiting for my dad to come back with rope to help me back out. I know what I experienced was just due to the lack of visual and auditory stimuli, but damn. It was the scariest thing that I have ever experienced. And we always bring a good amount of rope with us now, even if we think we won't need it in a cave. I was with my brother and my friend in Pepper Sauce Cave, Arizona. We were deep inside and I found a small tunnel that went off to the right of a path that you could crawl through. This tunnel was very narrow, and I had to crawl slowly, and you could almost feel the top press against your back. I told my brother to wait for 15 minutes, and if I don't come back, to come and get me. So I crawl in about 80 feet, and this tunnel starts to branch off to the right. It's getting narrower and narrower, and I thought I saw an opening at the end. I get closer with my flashlight, and the opening is not at all as big as I thought it was. So it's time to turn around. I tried, but there was no room. The walls were almost on both sides of my ribs, and the ceiling was nearly on top of my back. So 50 feet later, I'm crawling backwards on my chest, which was very difficult because there wasn't any room to turn around. Eventually, I get myself turned around and do start to head back. The tunnel looked completely different now, and I branched off another path that I didn't see crawling forward, but crawling back it was visible. I was totally lost and disoriented, on my stomach and very cramped. I was getting pretty nervous. So I started to scream to my brother and my friend, but I didn't hear them. I screamed louder and louder, but still I didn't hear them. I crawled on my stomach a little further, and I tried again, and I very, very faintly heard their voices, only they were below me. So I yelled to my brother at the top of my lungs to come and get me. He started crawling and yelling at me. The whole time I had no idea where he was, and I was just following the sounds of his voice. Suddenly, around the bend, I see a flashlight very far away, and I realized I was way off. I was incredibly happy to see him. I went to Makokada Caves in Iowa with 2 friends. One particular small cave we decided to explore started with a narrow 15-meter belly crawl. At the opening, a lot of cobwebs blocked the entrance, but they seemed to clear up after a few feet. I was the most experienced caver, so I went first and did the belly crawl pretty quickly. I came out in a small domed room about 1.5 meters tall and about 4 meters across. I had some time before my friends made it, so I was describing the room to them. I looked up at the ceiling and gasped. I'm not afraid of spiders, but the sheer volume of them caught me off guard. It must have been a minimum of 1,000, probably more like 2,000, all hanging from the ceiling with egg sacs all around them. I called to my friends, "Hey guys, there's a lot of spiders hanging from the ceiling. Don't stand up when you get in here." My friends were a little more wary of spiders and asking questions about them. How big are they? What color are they? Are they furry? I said, "They're not that big. They kind of look like black widows, but they're not. They're the wrong color. They're brown. The legs look a little lighter than the body." My friend, a Wisconsin DNR warden, yelled, "Really? Do they have a small pattern on their back, sort of like a violin?" "Yes," I respond. By this time, my friends were about caught up with me. My friend, the DNR warden, burst into the room, looked up, shuddered a bit, and then forced himself to look at one of the spiders up close. The color in his face completely drained out, and he screamed, "Get out! Everyone get out of this cave now!" He didn't say any more as he was already scrambling out of the cave as fast as he could. It took us about 20 minutes to get into that room, but it only took us about 3 minutes to get all the way out of that cave. When we finally got out, the other 2 of us were confused. My warden friend said, those were brown recluse, some of the more poisonous spiders in North America. We were in their lair. When they bite you, you go through excruciating pain for a few days. You get skin necrosis, and then possibly die. We didn't go in any more caves with cobwebs in them for the rest of that trip. During some cave exploring or splunking, don't know the difference between them, my family and some friends were in some deep caves, and as we were heading out, we found a slit about knee-high in the rock. Getting on your stomach, there was a tight squeeze you could get into, and it led into a small crawl space in the rock, with quartz glowing on the ceiling making a beautiful crystal ceiling display. We went in one by one, and if you were claustrophobic, this place was your living nightmare. Most times you could feel the ceiling on your back and the floor on your stomach, every time you took a breath. We went deep in, and it was just incredible, like a small world tucked away within solid rock. I had made it as deep as anyone could go, before the path waned to the left and covered with stalagmites and stalactites of sediment. Everyone was having a grand time when we started to feel some trickles of water on our backs. It turns out, it was raining outside, and with the way the crawl space dipped down before flattening out, this whole place would fill up with rainwater pretty damn quickly, with the only way for it to drain out was the way we came in. It started as trickles before it went into streams and began to pool up. Being the furthest away from the exit, and you can only just crawl flat on your stomach with jagged crystals pointing down from the ceiling, I started to panic a bit. Everyone crawled out as fast as they could as the water kept coming in, the streams growing larger and larger. We left one at a time as fast as we could, but it wasn't fast enough. I could feel the water coming up to my chin as I crawled behind my brother. Each inch I took forward felt so painfully slow that I could feel the walls compress around me, and the water was unrelenting, now splashing against my panicked squirms. I got out just as the water was up to my lips, and everyone got out safely. I am not eager to try that again. Well, this was a tomb, not a cave. I was exploring, alone, in a large ancient cemetery outside of a small town in Israel. These were Canaanite tombs that were thousands of years old. Many in this region had been left unexcavated, so the area I was looked like a huge low hill full of little dimples, marking where these tombs were. I was wandering around these shaft tombs, which were dug deep into the ground and then branched out with different spots carved out by rock for family members to be lain. Some of the tombs were open to the air and quite deep. I got a little too close to the edge of one and fell in. I fell maybe 10 feet and was stuck down there. It was a vertical drop and the sides were loose stone and rubble. It was the middle of the day in Israel, in the summer. I had no water, and my cell service was kaput since I was below ground. I remember just standing there, looking up out of this hole in the ground with the blazing sun above me, and realizing how silent it was. It was an awful feeling, stuck in an ancient grave. Like I was experiencing the same silence that had existed there forever, and I was now a part of it, or some sort of deep thought like that. Anyway, I tried to scramble out, but the sides were too eroded and kept crumbling when I attempted to hoist myself out. I was really scared I might bring down a whole wall of the tomb and become the most recent burial in a few thousand years. I was stuck for maybe 15 minutes at the most, before levering my way up by holding onto some roots and bracing myself on more stable bits of stone. The feeling of getting the heck out of there was so relieving and personal. I rarely share that story because I was such a fool. I explored many sites afterwards, but always much more prepared than I was that day. I hadn't even told anyone where I was heading when I left the house. This is something that happened to me when I was a kid, and I just wanted to share the story since it stuck with me for so long. I was about 7 or 8 years old. I can't recall exactly, but it was around that age. One weekend I was visiting my grandparents, who at the time lived on the countryside. I'm from Bosnia, Europe. They were only about an hour's drive away, and we went there early in the morning. Their house is in a wooded area, with a long, winding road leading up to each individual house, of which there weren't many, maybe 3 or 4. I knew the area well, since I went to visit almost every weekend. Besides going up to the houses, there is one section of the road that leads directly into the woods, sort of a natural trail. Our car broke down exactly around that spot, a flat tire. Since we were very close to where my grandparents live, and my folks knew I was familiar with the area, they let me go for a walk while my dad fixed the tire. This was about 9 or 10 in the morning, so they weren't really afraid to let me run around a bit. Being the curious kid that I was, and I still am, I went for the forest trail since the main dirt road wasn't very exciting. The trees were very tall and very dense, so even during daytime it was kind of dark. I went up that forest trail for a few hundred meters until I came to a crossroads. Now, this was more than 20 years ago, but it left a lasting impression on me, so here's what I recall. In the middle of the crossroads, at the very point that the roads fork, there was a small cave/opening of some sort. I went a bit closer and I noticed what seemed like fireflies sparkling in the pitch black hole. Not sure if fireflies even light up during the day, but that's how I remembered it. Besides that, I just felt this presence, as if I wasn't alone there, as if the cavern itself was beckoning me to enter. And then I noticed what seemed like several pairs of smaller red eyes peering from the darkness. At this point, I was quite spooked, thinking it was some kind of animal, and I decided to not go any further and just slowly back away. This is in Southeast Europe, so there aren't many dangerous animals around. Very rarely a wolf or a bear would be sighted, but usually not near human settlements. Nothing followed me, and I had no trouble getting back. I decided not to tell my parents about this, since I figured they would be mad and wouldn't let me play unsupervised for the remainder of our visit. They decided to leave me with my grandparents and pick me up on Monday while they went back during the afternoon. I'm very close with my grandmother. She and I are alike, especially now as a grown-up. So I told her about the encounter I had. She kind of laughed it off, saying, "Honey, there's nothing there. I walk there every day." But I was adamant about what I saw, and she agreed we'd go for a walk together and visit that spot. It wasn't far from her house, and we arrived there that same afternoon. We got to the crossroads and, like she said, there was nothing there. No burrow, no cave, just a flat spot where the crossroads meet. There were no traces at all of it being dug up or buried. Grandma even asked me, "Are you sure it was here?" And I replied with a yes. She didn't think much of it, chalking it off to some childish imagination, but she told me not to venture out here on my own again. We continued our walk, and I just stopped mentioning the event from then on. But to this day, even after all these years, I still remember this quite vividly. I even find it strange I'm able to recall the details, and of course I know memories can be distorted over time, and that what we think we remember may not always be the full picture since our minds love to fill in the blanks, but I just don't feel as if this is the case. I often contemplate what would have happened if I stepped closer, or worse, tried to enter the dark cave. I've read about, quote, evil places in forests around the world, or places where time and space can be warped. People walking into what they describe as different timelines or alternate dimensions. Perhaps this was one of those places. My grandparents don't live there anymore. Grandpa had passed away when I was 16 years old, and my grandma moved into the city in the same building as me and my folks. We still own the house and land there, but I haven't been there since. My dad goes out there a few times a year just to check up on things and clean up a bit. According to him, the house and land have almost been consumed by vegetation. They cut the electricity and water so they wouldn't pay the bills, so it's not very convenient staying over. But I do plan on going there sometime, perhaps during my next time off or vacation from work. I really want to go back to that road, assuming it still exists, and just see if I feel anything. Now that I'm an adult with the interest in the paranormal, I'm just so drawn to this memory.